right. So thank you everybody for coming. I'd like to welcome you to tonight's Drupal Nights. I am very pleased to introduce you to my esteemed colleague, Erich. Erich's going to be talking to you tonight about configurations as dependencies. I think that for those of you that don't know Erich, he's a very he's a good guy. No, he's an excellent developer. Very proud to have him on the BioRaft team. So we're very very excited to see and hear what you have to say tonight. So looking forward to this presentation, and take it away.
All right, thank you. So it appears that some of you have come with some sort of expectations, and I think you should lower those expectations. I don't deal well with pressure, so let's just tone it down a little bit here. We're going to be talking tonight about configuration as dependency, which is more of an idea and a strategy or a theory than it is as a practice. Previous talks that I've done have been code heavy. This is not going to be really code heavy. This is going to be more philosophical in nature about some of the new things that we can do with Drupal 8. So if you thought you were going to see a whole bunch of code and stuff, I'm sorry to disappoint you. There's not going to be a lot of code. This is me. This is my vanity slide. I am a senior developer at BioRaft. Been there for coming up to 1 year, but I've been working with Drupal for a long time, back in the 4.6 days. I'm embarrassed by the size of the picture on this slide because I really have little to do with the material that I'm presenting tonight. Most of the stuff that we're going to be talking about tonight, I'm really standing on the shoulders of giants, the giants in the Drupal 8 community who put together the configuration management system. And towards the second half of the talk, we're going to be talking about actual strategies for managing configuration in Drupal 8. And the strategy that I'm going to be talking about tonight was really worked on by these two guys. Some of you guys have met Moshe Weitzman before. If you haven't, Moshe is a well-known member of the Drupal community, a very long-time member. And Justin Ludwig, one of my favorite people in the entire world, is another senior developer at BioRaft. He's out in San Jose and couldn't be here tonight, but the two of them put together the bulk of the ideas of which I'm going to be talking about tonight. I had just a really small part of it. So, as I said, I'm a little embarrassed that I had myself so big on one side. These guys really deserve the main billing, and I should just have like a little tiny square down here. Here's what we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to give a brief overview of Drupal 8 configuration management. And when I say brief, I mean maybe the first third of tonight we'll talk about what's available in Drupal 8. I'm not an expert in the system, and there are far better resources out there than me, but in order to understand what we're talking about tonight, I'm going to give you a brief overview. The second thing we're going to talk about is strategies for managing your Git repository. There are some things that we can do now that we haven't been able to do before in Drupal, things that are very, very exciting. And we're also going to talk about things like using Composer and Drupal console. Moshe hates it when I talk about Drupal console because he's heavily involved with Drush, but never mind all that. And then lastly, we're going to be talking about multi-site considerations because that's a lot of what we do at BioRaft. And I know some of you are involved with multiple site configurations for Drupal. So there's a part of this that'll be really relevant to you. So configuration. So there's a couple caveats here. This talk isn't for everyone. If you're a single Drupal developer and you're putting out sites by yourself and you have no other developers working for you, the stuff that I'm really going to be talking about tonight might not be a lot of it's not going to be as useful to you. Some of it I think you'll get a kick out of, like the stuff with Composer and dependencies. How many people here are currently working on multiple site projects? Okay, so a few of you. So there's going to be some benefit here, I think, for some of you. And some of what I'm going to talk about tonight is going to be a little bit foreign to you, I'll be honest. It was really kind of foreign to me when we started hammering this stuff out between Justin and Moshe. And it took me a little bit of time to get on board, but I think once you get on board, you'll see the benefits to what we're going to be talking about. So again, some background, pre-Drupal 8. Who here has ever had to export configurations in Drupal 5, 6, or 7? Okay. What strategies do we typically use to export configuration? Features, yeah. Anything else?
Hand-rolled update hooks.
Hand-rolled update hooks, exactly. So there are some challenges with these things, right? So not all the things can be easily represented in code. Things have got better in Drupal 7, but certainly before then it was a real challenge to get everything to be able to be represented in code. The stuff that Beyrent has done, we had to hand-roll a bunch of really creative things in order to export aspects of content types, and we have a very robust system, but it shouldn't be this hard, right? But as you guys all know, it is hard. How many of you have configuration that's managed by your clients? Do you ever develop stuff and your clients can change some configuration? So what are the challenges with that?
Just letting you all know it's most of you.
Yeah, it's most of you. So the challenges with that, right? You've got some changes that need to go. Your client has made some configuration changes. Now you got a conflict. How do you get their changes and not step on them with your changes? No real easy way to do that pre-Drupal 8. So along comes Drupal 8. Drupal 8 now allows developers to change configurations safely. And clients can go and change the configurations to the extent that they're allowed. Again, that's more of a policy thing. You don't have to allow your customers to change configurations, and there are ways to prevent them from doing that. But let's say you do have them, go ahead and do that. Because of the way the Drupal 8 configuration management system works, it's now easy to do that, and we'll talk about that a little bit. With some module help, you can now provide an audit trail of configuration changes. So when developers go in and change configuration, your product team goes and changes things, or your clients do, now you've got an audit trail. So you can see who did what, when, where, and why. And because of the way that the configuration system works, it's now easier than ever to automatically create new instances of sites using a default set of configuration or stored set of configuration from your client sites. So, two types of configuration in Drupal. There's simple configuration, and there's configuration entities. So simple configuration stores very basic stuff, such as Boolean values, strings, integers. There's one copy of it, and it's like using variable set and variable get in Drupal 7. The configuration entities are more like content types. So you can create 0 or more items that are far more complex. They're fieldable, and examples of that include views, content types, and image styles. You can't really compare and say one's better than the other. They just do different things in different ways. So the Drupal 8 configuration system standardizes the configuration export into YAML files. YAML stands for yet another markup language. Drupal 8 has standardized on this file format for representing configuration in code. The system is designed to optimize the process of moving configuration between instances of the same site. That's a really important thing to remember. It is not a migration tool. It can be used for simple configuration and complex configuration and configuration entities. So again, fields, views, workflows, those sorts of things. All those things are now exportable in ways that we never were able to do fully in pre-Drupal 8. The way that Drupal stores them is stores the configuration in the database, but then you can go and export those into these YAML files, which are stored in the file system, but you can also tweak the configuration so that your configuration is stored in something like Mongo or Redis or some other key value store, which is really kind of fun. The biggest change, I think, in the configuration system is the philosophy change. In pre-Drupal 8, it used to be that modules would present some configuration. Those modules would be in control of those configurations. Drupal 8 kind of throws that on its head and says that once you enable this module, the configuration that gets imported now belongs to the site. So it's managed more holistically. So as Alex Potts says, sites own their configuration, not modules. This is a really important distinction, and it's completely different than the way Drupal's ever worked. So the way that this works is that when you've got a module, you can provide default configuration for that module. So let's say you've got a module that's got some form settings and things like that. You can export the default values of that into a YAML file and ship that with your module. When you enable the module, that configuration gets imported, and now it's there to go. So all the default configuration entities are assigned a universally unique ID, so a UUID, so that it's portable during the install process. And this allows the configuration system to tell the difference between a value that's changed, or it's been renamed, or deleted, or created. So it's a way to keep those things tracked. You can also then go and diff different versions of the configuration. So Acquia gave us this great diagram of what it looks like. So you've got your configuration in your UI. You can write the active configuration to the database, and then go ahead and export that as a series of YAML files, or you can actually package it up as a tarball, bring it over to your production site, load it in, and then same thing when you go and you make your changes in your production site, you can then go and export that back the other way. So in the configuration UI, you can now see a list of the configuration changes that have, settings that have changed, and you've got the opportunity to view them, diff them, and whatnot. And if the changes are acceptable, then you go and synchronize those changes. And that goes and reloads the active configuration that's stored in the database, or in Mongo, or Reddit, or however you do. And so that's kind of how this whole thing plays together. Finally, contrib and custom modules use the same tools for managing configuration. So in pre-Drupal 8, it was the Wild West. Some modules did variable set and get. Some did their configuration in other tables. It was kind of all over the place. Some used features by default. So now we have the same system, the underlying system for managing that configuration. As I said earlier, default configuration is stored as YAML files within the module. And then, again, the sea change here is that once that module is installed, that configuration becomes part of the site holistically, instead of just a piece of that one module. So this is kind of a problem historically. People who have been in Drupal in a long time are used to the old way of making changes with update hooks, rather than making simple changes in the configuration in the YAML files. But it's really important that you get used to that, because that's just the way it works now. The system here for managing hard and soft optional dependencies is really robust. So what I mean by that, let's say you've got a module over here, and it's got another module that it depends on, but you forget to list that dependency in this module over here. You're not going to be able to enable this module. The system's going to say, okay, that's a hard dependency. Now you can't go ahead and install this. A soft dependency would be if you have this module over here that presents a content type, and then you've got this module over here which has a field that's optional over here. You can still go ahead and install your first content type. The field just won't show up, and that's cool until you go and enable this other module. Now all of a sudden your configuration updates and that field shows up. So it's really flexible that way. And then it also supports things like nested module dependencies. So when you go and you've got a bunch of modules that depend down the chain, when you go and export all of that, the configuration system is smart enough to say, oh, okay, I know what all my dependencies are, and now they're all together in the configuration files. That's never been able to be done before. So that's really powerful stuff. If you're going to be doing any work with Drupal 8 configuration, you're probably going to want a lot of these tools. Some of these tools Peter has contributed to. Raise your hand, Peter. Anybody who doesn't know Peter? Peter also a heavy hitter in the Drupal community. Glad you're here. and he's done a lot of work with this kind of stuff. If you have any questions about the specifics of Drupal configuration management, you should talk to Peter, because Peter has presented at DrupalCon on this stuff. I think you're presenting 2 weeks in Dublin. Not about any of this, okay. You can catch his one from New Orleans, though, where you did talk about this stuff, right? You talked a little bit about this stuff in New Orleans? No. Okay, I lied. Don't talk to Peter. Peter knows nothing. However, you can talk to Moshe, and, who's not here. But you can go to DrupalNights.org, and you can watch his video that he did on Drupal 8 configuration management. It's awesome. He's awesome, and I highly recommend him. Don't forget to tip your waiter. Okay, so Matthew Tift at Lullabot reminds us that with Drupal 8, there is no quote-unquote recommended workflow. What he means by that is that the configuration system in Drupal 8 is highly configurable and flexible enough to be used in multiple workflows. Even though that it was designed with this single-site dev, staging, production workflow in mind, we can tweak it for any other sort of workflows. And we're going to talk about some ways to do that. And probably the best way to work with that, I think, is by using Git. Who doesn't know what Git is? All right. So Drupal 8's configuration system allows the site configuration to be stored in code, so that's awesome, which means that we can now put our configuration in source control. Yay! Git's built to handle complex branching, merging, and conflict resolution. Now, I'm assured by some people that once you hit a merge conflict in Git and you resolve it a certain way, Git will forever remember how you solved it. I don't know how true that is, but some people say that that's the way it works.
Recorded resolution cache.
There it is, recorded resolution cache. So yeah, Git really is that smart. Where that comes in to importance, we'll talk about in a little bit. So here's where things get a little bit squirrely, and I'm afraid I'm going to lose some of you here. We're advocating creating 2 repositories, one for your code, one for your configuration. Yeah, 2 repositories. I know some of you are going to get lost. I got lost when I first said that. When I first saw that, I was like, really? 2? And I'll tell you why that's important. We want to use Git to manage individual site differences and conflict resolutions, okay? By having 2 repositories, imagine that it is somewhat similar to the concept of separating your configuration and logic the same way that you separate your presentation logic and your business logic, okay? You can store your default configurations for all sites in a master branch, and if you're running a multi-site, each one of your client sites is simply a branch off that master configuration, okay? That's really, really powerful, because that is what gives you the flexibility to manage the client's changes separately from default configuration changes. So the way that this works is that you can update all sites from a single configuration on the master branch, okay? You can override default master configurations for a particular field on a particular client site. So imagine your Sony BMG, right? You've got Adele's website over here, and then you've got Metallica over here. Metallica's taxonomy is going to be completely different than Adele's, and that's okay. But you're going to say you're going to have a master configuration that provides some defaults, right? So you want to be able to update those default configurations without overwriting what Adele's are and what Metallica's are. And you want to preserve what they've got configured. Taxonomy is one example. Everything is represented in configuration. So you can, the site name, okay? Let's say that you're running Sony BMG, and you've got this music platform, and so your default site name is Sony BMG Music Platform. Adele's is going to be Adele.com, and Metallica is going to be, Set Your Cat on Fire or something like that. And you need to be able to support all those configuration differences. You can also change the configurations via the UI on production, or you can go just change it in code. So it supports a lot of different workflows. Now, our code repository, and this is another big thing. If you've been doing Drupal for a long time, you're used to committing Drupal core, all of your contrib modules, your themes, your exported configurations, and your custom modules. Everything lives in the same repo. So now you've got a giant repo containing all this stuff. What we're proposing is that you no longer do that. Because we have Composer now, all you really need is your custom configurations, your custom themes, and your custom modules. That's pretty much it, right? So we'll talk about that a little bit. Who does not know what Composer is? Everybody knows what Composer is? Okay, so Composer is it's a tool for automatically downloading code that you depend on that's not yours. So in a standard Drupal site, you're going to have Drupal core, and then you'll have 5, 10, 120 contrib modules. Those contrib modules are not yours, but your project depends on them. So Composer is a way of specifying what modules you need and what versions you need, and it will go and automatically download all those for you. So what you do in your Composer file is you declare what your dependencies are and the version that you're dependent on. And what Composer then does is it goes and figures out all the dependencies and figures out this big dependency chain, and then goes and downloads everything. It's really, really cool the way that it works. But here's where the change is. If you stop and think about it, configuration is just another dependency, right? You've got your code, you've got your functionality that your modules provide, but your configuration, the way that you built your site, is just another dependency. It's a different way of thinking about it. And now with Composer, we can actually have the tools to version our configuration and download them like any other dependency, like you would views or Drush or anything else. So that's what we're going to do. Well, that's exactly what we're going to talk about here. Managing configuration as a dependency by listing it in your composer.json file. And what we're going to do is we're going to version our commits of the configuration, and we're going to tag them in Git so that we have specific versions. I promise this is the only code you're going to see in this whole slide deck. This is an excerpt from a composer.json file. And in this particular one, we set up some repositories. So the first one we set up is the Drupal Composer repository. So that's where we're going to pull Drupal from and all of its contrib modules. This second one here, it's a type of VCS. So in this case, it's some version control system. It could be Subversion, it could be Git. In this case, it's Git. And this is where our config lives. It's just another repository. In the require section of composer.json, that's where you list all the individual requirements for your project. So if you've got views, you would have views in here. If you've got rules, help me out. What are some other modules that you might want to use? Path auto, panels, whatever it happens to be. You list all those and their versions. However, in the highlighted section here, we've got two customers in our multi-site instance, one called Dev Alpha, or one called Alpha and one called Bravo. Those get installed in your typical, /site/ alpha and site/ Bravo. And so that's where we set up the configuration dependencies. Oh, and those tags, I'm sorry, going back, those tags are Dev Alpha and Dev Bravo. That could be 8.1.foo, that could be 2.6, whatever it happens to be. We're happen to use dev-alpha and dev-bravo as our tag names. Now the last bit here is this tells Composer how we want that code downloaded. So for our config section, we want to force Composer to download it as source. There are a couple of different options here. You can look it up, what they all are. There's an auto one, there's a package one, I think, and then there's source. We always want source for our configurations. So, our repository. This is all our repository has. Okay? We've got a composer.json file, which contains all of our dependencies. We've got an empty web directory. We've got a scripts directory, which has some processing scripts, which I'll talk about in a minute, config, and so on and so forth. This is it. We can also, in web, we'll have like our custom configs. We'll have our custom modules, which will get downloaded later. When you then go and run Composer install, apparently I'm challenged with buttons. So you then goes Composer install. It goes and figures out all the dependencies. It reads through your Composer.json file and goes and downloads everything and sticks it where it's supposed to go. So beforehand, we've got analysis of what our directory looks like. Then we go and look at the web directory. It has now gone and grabbed all our modules, our themes, our configs, everything. And it does that all for you. And the magic of that is in this installer paths. This is what tells it where to put the stuff. So our config is prefixed with this $ name variable. So for our alpha, it knows where to put the config stuff for each individual site. Our core stuff goes in web core. Our modules, our contrib modules go in this web module / contrib. Our custom stuff goes in web modules custom. Composer also allows you to tack on a bunch of commands. So there are pre-install commands, things that need to happen beforehand, things that need to happen before you run Composer update, and then things, again, for post-install and post-update. So you can tack on a bunch of things. If you need to manipulate directories in any way, you can just put your own scripts in here, which is really cool. All right, so talking about the repos. The way we see this is that you're going to have a master branch of your configuration repo, which is going to have the default configurations for all your sites. So you may only have one site. That's fine. You only have one site in your master configuration. If you have multiple sites that share the same configuration, so again, something like Sony BMG, where all of their music sites, they've got the same bits of functionality. All of that goes into your master configuration. So when you go and set up a brand new site, that's what they get. And then from there, they go and tweak the bits that they want. Okay. Each client then creates a branch. They get their own branch off that master config repository. Okay. Why do we do it this way? The reason we do it this way is now you can branch and manipulate your configurations separately from your code. Okay, so it allows you to do things like tweak the configuration separately from what other developers are working on, and you can go through a normal dev process even on your configuration. You can test out new things, do pull requests on it, and so on and so forth. However, for a site to work, you need both repositories. So you still need your code, you still need your configuration. What you can then do is your site defaults. What you would do is you would put, one way you could do this is you could put your master configuration in your code repository. So as you're working on code, you've got your master configuration right there. And then you can go and mirror just that master configuration into your configuration repo as read-only. Okay, so now you've just got one place where you edit it. It goes over and is represented in your other repository. It can't be touched, but that's where you go and create your branches off of that. And one of the tools that you could use for that is Git subtree split, which allows you to take just a part of your Git repo and split it off into something else. There are config tools like the config tools module, which will auto commit configuration changes to your Git repo, which is really, really cool. Now, the advantage of using things like subtree split versus just having Composer pulling down the repository. The reason we do this is that we want developers to be able to make their changes with only a single pull request when you're building features and fixing bugs. Otherwise, you're going to need 2 pull requests, and it makes it very difficult to go and approve them and merge them in a single transaction, and that makes it hard to roll back and fix problems. So a sample developer workflow would be that you create a branch on your code repo. So you've got Metallica needs to add a new content type for whatever. You go and then create a branch for this new feature. You put in all of your code and your configurations. Config repo will be available to edit the configs. And for sites where the module is already enabled, then you can go and merge them. Where you've already got it enabled, then you have to take that YAML file and you have to add it to the module where it's already enabled. So that's kind of a pain, but there are ways to automate that. So again, the configuration repo benefits, while a feature is being worked on, you can have a specific version of config that's being used that won't conflict with other features being developed by any other person. I don't know if any of you have ever worked in something where you're working on features and this person exports something, this person exports something, now there's a conflict. By being able to branch your configuration, you eliminate that risk. You can develop completely separately and then deal with those changes when you go and merge in the same way. If a problem arises with the configuration, let's say you go and you deploy this to your staging site and there's a problem, because you're doing this with Composer, all you need to do is roll back the version in your composer.json file, and now you can roll back your whole configuration. So as a bulk, it gives you a lot of power to be able to make changes and fix things when they go wrong. And what you can also do is take an exact replica of your entire site's configuration, and you can build it from scratch during development and debugging with any client data at all, because it's just code at that point. So some more benefits. It helps determine if a bug involving config is actually solved rather than just solving it for a particular piece of data. So it allows you to do tweaks and rollbacks so you can really figure out exactly where the problem is. It helps with testing unique configuration considerations where your client configuration differs from yours in specific ways. And it, again, like I said, it gives you the potential to assist with new rollouts because now you've got a master set of configuration that you can just apply to a brand new site. How else can we benefit from this? You could create a repository for your theme. Well, I don't know how many of you guys let your customers make theme changes. Some people have junior staff on hand. I think this is Peter's idea. You may want to have separate configurations for your theme, so other people can make those changes and version those changes in an isolated way, and you just pull those themes in as yet another dependency. So, multi-site configuration requirements. So for a multi-site, your site, you have to have at least 2 sites for this to be considered multi-site, right? You've got default configurations, and they may need to be updated. So we talked about this again, example, wording may be different for one thing than it is on another. Let's say you've got a survey on one site and a survey on the other site, and site 2 needs like slightly different wording. But the key here is that each site can be configured uniquely and may override those defaults, and you need to be able to handle that. Simple config, like the site name, and your complex config, all that stuff may need to be overridden, so you need a way to handle all that. And you need to be able to handle those conflicts. So again, this is where Git comes in, where you're able to export your configuration from your production site and compare it to a master configuration, merge the two, and then apply. So there's an experiment. That's the URL. Moshe put together this Git repo, which implements this multi-site pattern that we're talking about. So within that, he's got 2 default sites. He's got some default configuration, and he provides a lot of documentation for how you can go and make changes here and here, put them back into their client branches, and then apply some default configuration to override those changes or merge them with those changes. So you should definitely check that out. But basically, it kind of looks like this. So again, you've got your multi-site repository with a master configuration. Then you've got so this is your code repository. You've got your configuration repository. You're mirroring your master config over using git subtree split. And then from there, your master configuration has branches for each of your clients. Okay? So when you're working on this, most of the pull requests happen and new features and bug fixes are going to happen over here, right? And then they're going to get merged in. But you can also go and create development branches off your client branches if you have a client-specific problem, right? And then merge those back in. So the way that the branches are pulled into, they're pulled into a subdirectory of the config directory. So each specific client has a subdirectory underneath the config directory. And that's where your individual client configurations are represented. Now, an alternative to this is where you start to automate things. So one of the things that we're looking at is having an automated process that looks at what modules a client site is running. Okay? Installs that same set of modules into like a temporary site, commits that export, and then goes and export that and commits that to a default branch for the client. And then you go and compare that with their live configuration and merge in any changes. So a lot of the idea here is that a lot of this stuff can be automated to make your development experience a lot better, because there is a lot of cognitive overhead. You're like, okay, I've got this repository, I've got this repository, how do I get all these things together? There are tools to help you merge and manage all those changes. But so this is the basic flow here. Again, so you've got your master configuration, you've got your client branches, we have some master configuration changes. So let's say we've added a new field to a content type, and then the client also wants to change a label on another field. Okay, so all those things need to happen and merged into the client branch without overwriting each other. So we set up a Drupal multi-site where the master site carries the master config, and the client sites merge in the master config periodically. We'll talk about that in a second. So the client occasionally can change their configuration on their own sites. That configuration gets automatically exported and committed to their own branch frequently. So we imagine that as like a nightly process. I'm sure you guys are all doing like nightly backups of your databases, right? Imagine if you go and you tack into that process, you dump your client's configuration, look for changes, merge it into their branch automatically. Done. So that can happen all the time. That can happen as frequently as you want. And then when the master configuration has a change, you need to pull that out. Then we merge from the master using a tag into each client branch. So now everybody gets those changes. When fixing bugs using a client site, a developer can choose to push commits directly into the master config or to a client config, depending on what the nature is. So if you go and you push to a client config, you can actually do that automatically depending on how you set the origin. You can integrate changes into multiple origins and just do a git push directly in. So again, that's an easier way to work with all this stuff. Again, this is what we were talking about, where you've got your master config, you've got some kind of a live database, you take a dump of their configuration, yeah, I said take a dump. Take a dump of their configuration. You automatically merge those config changes, if there are any, back into the client branch. And you can do that with a bunch of automated tools. And again, you can do that on a nightly basis, you can do that every 12 hours, you can do it weekly, whatever your schedule happens to be. All right, so multi-site projects do have unique configuration requirements. You need to be able to handle default configurations. You need to handle configuration changes, things like module updates that have new configuration. And then you've got to be able to handle cases where your clients have overridden that configuration, or they're changing it rather frequently. You need a workflow that can handle all these cases. This is a little rough around the edges, but it's one potential way to solve these problems. And a lot of this can be automated. Right? If you have a more sophisticated dev shop, and you can use tools like Probo or CircleCI or even Jenkins to manage and automate some of these processes. The thing is that you shouldn't have to worry about this stuff. You should be free to think about the product and developing the product and not worry about the inner bolts of all this stuff, because it can get kind of tedious, right? And there is a lot of cognitive overhead. All right, so resources for those of you who want to really dig into the API, the configuration API. There's the Drupal handbook. DevAquia has got some stuff for this. Check out Moshe's Git repository. Lullabot's got some stuff that you want to read, and you really want to go back and watch Moshe's video on DrupalNights.org. All right, I ran through that really quickly so we have time for questions and answers. And I didn't want this to turn into an hour and a half or 2 hour long presentation, so because we all want to go out and drink. So there's a lot of stuff here. Questions?
When would you use update.php now?
Yeah, so when you want to do your hooks, I wouldn't do that at all, actually. I would, instead of running your update hooks, I would take those configuration changes and I would put them in default config for individual modules. Export that configuration, merge it into your clients.
So just maybe changing content, if you have a bulk change of content.
Exactly,
Yeah, like
that sort of thing.
changing your data model, I think,
Right.
like the way you store your entity data or something like that, where you're changing, you content in the database as opposed to configuration.
Right. Yeah, and this still plays along with features. You can still then go and use features to export your changes and manage it that way. It's still, at the end of the day, you're going to take those features, you're going to import them into your site, they become part of your active configuration, you then dump them out into code, merge that code into your master configuration, that merge into your clients. And again, that can all be automated. Who else had a question?
In the old Drupal,
Yes.
when you removed a module or something like that, it would leave little bits and pieces at times in the database. How does storing it separately, the configuration, how does that work if you were to remove a module? Would it clean up everything, or would that still be part of the site configuration?
When you go and remove a module, I don't know what you no longer need. And then merge that again.
You have to uninstall the module.
Yeah,
Right.
It's the only
So-
option now.
Right,
Yeah.
it's the only way to do it, right.
It's either on or uninstalled, and as far as I know, it's every time I've installed a module, it cleans up all the
That makes
configuration.
sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, so then at that point, now your active configuration has this update where this module configurations no longer exist. You then go and export that configuration to your code, merge it into your master configuration, and then merge into your branches as needed.
So at that point, do we have to run Composer Update again, or when does that?
No, actually,
No.
that's, you're really only going to use Composer Update when you've got, well, you would use it for if you've got new tagged versions of your dependencies. So if you've got a new version of the module, if you've tagged a new version of your configuration, absolutely, yes. You would run Composer Update and then load in that that configuration into your active configuration. Right.
Have you thought at all about sort of production or any environment deployment workflows with Composer?
Right, so we're working on that ourselves, and we're using tools like I said, Probo CI or Circle CI to do a build environment. So basically, you would run Composer without the required dev. So you wouldn't get your dev tools like Devel or PHP unit and that sort of stuff. That would build out your artifacts, and then you would take that and ship that and deploy that as a unit up to your production sites. And you can either do it in place with something like rsync, or you can do it into a parallel directory and then just do a directory rename. I've seen lots of different ways to do that, but the basic idea here is that you use something to run Composer, pull down all the dependencies, build out your system, and then export that. And then you would use a tool like Drupal console to load in the new configuration, or run update to PHP, or however it is that you're going to manage that.
Have you tried to go down the road at all yet of creating a separate repository / composer package for each module on the site / theme?
We haven't, but you could.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what the benefit would be. Like if you've got all of your custom, I mean, I guess the only benefit that I would see to that is if you've got a piece of code that's shared across multiple
Yeah, that's
projects.
exactly it.
Yeah, so at that point, you just add the extra repo, you declare that extra repository in your composer.json, and then list your module as just another dependency, and do it that way. Cool. Anybody else?
So if you're a dev shop and you have mastered, almost created your own distribution, that you're reusing multiple times for multiple clients, and you've got a great, base theme that you've created, you would make all of those, like put them all on GitHub, so that when you now spit up a new client site, say, hey, go grab all of this stuff, put the version numbers.
Yeah.
Only
Yeah.
managed in one place.
Exactly, and then if you wanted to do variations on that, you could either branch that base theme, or you can fork it into a separate repo and make your changes, and then add that forked path to your composer.json. Yeah, lots of different ways that you could do that. And if you've got changes that, in one that you want to split across them all, then you just merge those changes across. Okay. One last thing, BioRaft is hiring. We are always looking for great people, talented developers, talented product people. If you're interested in joining our team, talk to Michelle, talk to Ben, talk to myself, talk to any of the crew sitting in the back there. My people are here to answer to you. All right, and lastly, thank you as always for coming and listening. It would be very boring to stand up here and talk to an empty room. There would be no Drupal nights without you. Thank you for coming.